Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have Matty Beckerman with us, currently residing in California and a member of the Directors Guild of America. Now, we're going to be discussing the Brown Mountain Lights out there in North Carolina and just some amazing anomalies associated with them. Now, he is also the writer of several films and working on two currently, American Satan and Miss Cannabis. So he has a lot of stuff on his plate right now, and we're going to do our best to pick his brain with the limited amount of time that we have. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
I'm great, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's an honor to speak with you, and this is just really exciting. I talked to you a little bit before the show and told you about the Marfa Lights that I want to go visit just a few hours away from me in San Antonio, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And you said that there's actually some similarities to the Brown Lights that you did a lot of research on and that had a big impact on your film.
Yeah, I mean, the Marfa Lights, very similarly to the Brown Mountain Lights, have, a history of people you can actually go and see them. It's something that, thousands of people have seen over hundreds of years. It's a physical anomaly and it hasn't been explained. Same thing with the Brown Mountain Lights. Just like the Marfa Lights in Texas, there's physical road signs. You could pull right up there, and if you're lucky, you'll see them. Not everybody does, but oftentimes you will.
When did you first discover the Brown Mountain Lights?
So my family had been living in the mountains of North Carolina since the 70s. My grandparents have a home there. I would go visit them all the time, and I would always hear stories about the Brown Mountain Lights. And I had never seen them. I'd never gone to them. So one summer I was working up at my uncle's store, which was kind of like a flea market type mall. And one of the guys that I worked with there, nicest guy ever, a little kooky, he started telling me this story about how he had seen the Brown Mountain Lights and he was abducted. I really did not believe him. I was very skeptical. I was like, this guy's nuts, But he was really convinced. And then he had this story about being repeatedly abducted. I took it with a grain of salt. I said, oh, that's interesting, but what's this?
Right.
Then I started hearing from a lot more people who had seen the lights and also claimed they'd been abducted. And I heard this from a police officer, from a school teacher. And once it got to that level for me, I was completely captivated by it. I said, this is too strange. I have to go research it.
Absolutely. Now, the school teacher and the police officer that had that testimony, did they describe similar things happening to them with these abductions, or did you hear much about that?
Yeah, I did. So when I went out and started writing the movie, it was originally called Project Blue Book. And because the Brown Mountain Lights is actually a subject of one of the Project Blue Book original investigations, and it's one of the ones that were inconclusive. So that's how I started writing the film, and really based on the Brown Mountain Lights, but not completely. And then as I got to North Carolina and started really doing the heavy research for the film, I started interviewing people on camera and kind of getting their opinion and their backstories. And the opening of the film, Alien Abduction, which is the poster kind of sitting right behind me here.
That's a cool poster.
Thank you. It's the opening of the movie is basically a documentary showing the interviews with people and kind of the experts. And we go to Appalachian State University and we interview the professor of astronomy there who's been studying the lights for many, many years. We talked to Josh Warren, a leading paranormal expert, and we talked to a bunch of locals who claim they've seen the lights and things that have happened to them around it. So we go back into the history of it and really kind of show it. And that was really what was fascinating to me, was creating the story based on real events.
Now, how far back have they dated these lights?
They date back over 800 years. So they predate electricity. The first reports were from the Cherokee and Catawba Indians, Native Americans. And the story is, and the legend is, that there was a giant battle, and the Braves were up there fighting, and they all died. And the lights are supposedly the lanterns and torches of the women who go out looking for their husbands. And that's what the lights are supposed to symbolize. Now, this story is kind of repeated throughout history. There's this folk song actually called the Brown Mountain Lights, which is one of the most famous bluegrass songs. And if you look it up, everyone from Roy Orbison's covered it. All the big famous bluegrass and folk kind of artists have covered this song. And it's about a plantation owner who is hunting on Brown Mountain, and he goes missing. And all of his slaves go out searching for him, and they can't find him either. And then they go missing as well. So this story of large groups of people going missing keeps on repeating itself throughout history, and it's always associated with the lights. And the Brown Mountain Lights song is really based on. They say that the lights are the lanterns of the slaves looking for the slave owner, looking for the plantation owner.
Now, I'm looking at some of the pictures on your website, mattybeckerman.com, and it looks like there's these anomalies almost above the hand there. And I mean, this is really cool. So you took these back just a few years ago then?
Yeah, so I actually saw the lights myself. So my wife and I went to the Overlook, and just like in Marfa, Texas, there are signs right on the sides of the highway that say, this is the Brown Mountain Lights Overlook. This is where you go and see them. So we went to the kind of backwoods stop, which is called Wiseman's View. And I brought a friend of mine who is a shaman who trained in Peru and has been kind of really in touch with the earth. And he came with me from California. It's so LA of me to say. I know. It's my shaman buddy.
That's awesome, man.
But it's true. And he's pretty special and pretty tapped in. So we saw the lights that night, and there were about 9 or 10 of them. They're like these giant orbs in the sky. And I was completely ill prepared. So I didn't have my camera crew with me. I didn't have anybody with me. It was like the first night we got there. And these lights were just like glowing and moving all around. It was wild. So John, my shaman buddy, starts doing this energy work when he sees them. He starts, doing stuff. And my wife took a couple pictures. And she says, wait a second, look at these pictures. These things are showing up in the pictures. So, plenty of people have experienced kind of orbs in their photography and kind of like beams of light. These things that we experienced, and you could probably show them on the show and cut them in a little bit, were wild. There were beams of light coming out of his head and his eyes and his arms and showing up in just about every shot. And it was definitely an experience. Then I got my camera, just an iPhone, just on this iPhone actually, and started taking pictures. And the same orbs and things were showing up in those pictures as well. So you could see kind of a series, and that's right where the Brown Mountain Lights are, right in the Overlook.
What did your shaman friend say he felt that energy was?
He was already doing this healing work. So you could see these lights coming out of his hands, and you could see kind of the energy going through us and into our bodies and out. And he said we were just in a very strong location. He called it a vortex, which I've heard many times before. The energy level in that specific spot sort of bends time and bends experience.
Now, what I'm trying to figure out is if there are extraterrestrials that tend to hang out around those areas, it probably has something to do with the energy, the concentration of energy, etc. Yet I'm very fascinated with what their experiences were. Could you describe some of that to us with people that told you about their testimonies?
Yeah, so there's one guy. It's a pretty wild story. A bunch of friends, and this is in the 80s, head up to the Brown Mountain Overlook on the side of Highway 181. And there's probably like 15 people there. And Joshua Warren told me this story, who's a paranormal researcher. And he had spoken to these parties directly. So I'm telling it through him. So this guy, he gets out of his car, sitting at the Overlook with a group of friends. And these 2 giant orbs come up right onto the Overlook and are sitting there like static, just there. And he said they were close to 8 to 9 feet on either diameter. Instead of running and being scared like everyone else, this guy walks up to the orb and actually sticks his hand into it.
That's crazy.
Now the story is really interesting from 2 different perspectives. One is from his perspective, and the other one is from the people who watched him. So in his perspective, he stuck his hand in, and it was only 4 seconds, and he felt like an electric shock. The other people who were sitting there said that he stuck his hand in, and for almost 5 minutes was standing there shaking. And they said that the light went from 8 feet and dimmed around him, and like got really tight. So he only experienced 5 seconds, and he said and the other people who saw it for minutes. So there's definitely some kind of time warp and time discrepancy that went on.
Did he describe anything else while he felt that shaking and that electricity sensation?
Yeah, and he said it like it was like a piece of lightning went through his body, and he said it was real quick. It was like boom, in and out, and he was kind of shocked at people's reactions around him. Now he has since passed away, but some of the people that were there that night had retold the story to Josh Warren.
Okay. And then, so maybe these orbs could possibly be like drones for ET?
Yeah. I interviewed another guy who said he had seen one of these orbs moving through the forest. People have described them as swamp gas, as, every scientist that goes up there that has a field of study somehow tries to explain it in their own field, right? So
I like the highly concentrated swamp gas. You can use that on everything. Oh, that's B4, B52. No, that's swamp gas. That's a UFO. No, that's swamp gas.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a silly excuse. But one thing that's interesting is that these lights move intelligently. They move around trees. They chase people. Somebody told me that they had seen what looked like a small creature inside of them actually moving with them. That was one report. I have a video up on my site, either alienabductionfilm.com or mattybeckerman.com, where I went and showed the film in Morganton, North Carolina, which is the closest town to the Brown Mountain Lights. That's kind of where you go to see them. And we had about 700 plus people show up to the premiere. And in the lobby afterwards, we had to have multiple theaters. So I just had everyone gather in the lobby. And I said to the crowd, I said, how many people here have personally seen the Brown Mountain Lights? And I'm not kidding you, at least 80% of the audience had raised their hands. Now, this was after I'd made the film. So I went and started, talking to people, and they started telling me stories about, what their own experiences were. And, telling me stories about what had happened. And those stories were even more captivating than the original stuff I had documented. It was pretty wild.
Now, have you talked to people that have given you testimonies of like actually physically having some type of test done on them, on some, table, metal surroundings or descriptions like that?
It's my first friend that I met had described not being examined, but being downloaded information on different airplanes, and he would design these wild devices. Now, there's a few stories that are really interesting. So there's a man, his name was Ralph Lale, and he would own this little gem shop on the side of Brown Mountain, and in the back of his gem shop, if you paid him, I think it was like $30 or $40, you could go back, and he had what he called was the mummified remains of an extraterrestrial, which is pretty wild. Now, what Ralph would do is pack a lunch. He'd walk out in the woods, and he'd say, all right, I'm leaving. My friends are going to pick me up. And Ralph would disappear for weeks at a time. No one knew where he went, and he claimed he'd go on to a ship and go to this other dimension. Ralph's gem shop, this is in the 80s. So Ralph's gem shop, when he passed away, they, and I'd say they, came in and bulldozed his shop, and no one knows where that body is.
Okay, so it actually could be something that maybe there's just like a wild hoax, but at the same time, there's not that there to find that. What do you think? I mean, did you actually ever see it?
I think Ralph Lales was a hoax, but it doesn't explain how he would disappear for all that time. And actually, if you look at Joshua Warren's site, he has a picture of this alien body. And it's a little hokey. I don't know if I truly believe that. I think he was maybe just out for a buck or two. But that doesn't explain all the other things that happened. So one of the most captivating, situations for me was when I was doing the interviews for the film, interviewing a local police officer. And the story he told me was crazy. So he was responding to a call that the lights were there. He drove up to the overlook, and sure enough, there were three giant orbs in the sky. He then pulled up to the intersection, and he said the orbs started following him. He got freaked out and started driving down the highway. And he said these orbs chased him physically, and they were right behind him, just following the police car. He said he got up to 120 miles per hour driving down these mountain roads. And they were right on him, moving with him, driving around the curves with him. The next thing he remembers is waking up in his car 18 plus hours later, not knowing what had happened. It was daylight out. It was almost the next evening. And he has no recollection of what transpired in that time.
When was this exactly?
He said this was like in the early 2000s. In the interview with him, he got really upset that he had told me this. I don't know. I guess I had broken down his barriers, and I'm a nice guy, and he would talk to me. And I believed what he was telling me. I might have been one of the first people. He said that he had initially filed a police report to claim what had happened. And he was so ridiculed and laughed at that it just became something he never wanted to go back and relive.
Now, is he still a police officer?
He is. And I don't know if today he is, because I haven't talked to him in many years. But he would not let me retain the interview or use it. He wouldn't sign his release forms. And I kind of respected that because I knew what that could mean for his career. That's one of several stories that are kind of similar to that, which is, rather bone-chilling.
Now, I wonder if there's certain times of the year where there's more activity. If it's a full moon, there might be more things going on. Or did you ever connect any of those kind of dots?
Yeah, they claim that in like October and November, like in the fall, there's a little bit more activity. People see them more often. And that's what I experienced too, because that's when we shot the film. We actually shot on location there.
So do you think that they are ETs or maybe spirits, or what does your gut tell you they are?
From my personal experience with my friend, the shaman, who and my wife and I up there, I mean, it's a definitely powerful place. I have no explanation directly what it is, but there's certainly something supernatural going on there. And there could be a real, time warp or time differential. When you talk about the guy putting his hand in the beam of light and then losing time, or the police officer with 18 hours missing, that is like a rift in time. And who knows? This could be a parallel universe. It could be, their way of moving, and that's how their vehicles could be powered. I mean, that's a weird, way of thinking about it, but I can't really think of much else. And it also explains, the groups of people missing throughout the history, from the Cherokee Indians to, the plantation owner. And then our actual story shows a group of people who also go missing. It has to be something. It's like a Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, okay. And like you brought up a minute ago, when that one guy had his hand in that orb, he felt like it was just a few seconds, but they said it was several minutes. So just think if, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, whoever knows how long ago, you go into something and it's almost like a momentary lapse there, where when you come back out, it could be 200 years later, but it just felt like a few seconds. That's very fascinating. And I also wonder if there could be some type of, maybe it's a spirit energy or something as well, or a combination. Maybe it's been here longer than we have. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, in one of the pictures that we took at Brown Mountain, I'm looking over the edge, and my friend John is sitting next to me on my left-hand side. And just above my head, like right around here, you can see this almost hazy, look like smoke-filled face. And it is a face very similar to my poster. Um, I mean, if you look it up and turn your brightness up, you can see it extremely clear. So I think it's a clear sign of extraterrestrial involvement.
Have you personally seen UFOs outside of that area?
Um, I have, but I can't, definitively say, oh, that was a UFO. But I certainly have seen things that defy logic.
Now, in LA, I mean, what's it like out there as far as the people that you are around a lot with work or friends and stuff? Are they pretty open-minded to this type of stuff as well, or?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'm big into science fiction. I read a ton, and I'm into that whole world. So I think you have to be pretty arrogant and pretty naive to think that out of the multitude of billions of stars out there, that we are alone in this universe. We find new planets every day, super Earths that are able to sustain life. We can't be that arrogant.
Absolutely. And have you noticed the Earth changes, let's say 20 years or so, over the past 20 years, not only just seem a little more extreme, but if you look at the sun, or you don't want to look directly at the sun, but doesn't it just seem a lot more intense now than it did 20 years ago? Like it's a lot wider and not as yellow?
I mean, if you're experiencing what we are in the last couple of days, it was 104 degrees at my house yesterday, which, that's pretty abnormal. We're in the hottest period that we've ever been in. And last year was the hottest on record since we started taking records. And this year is supposed to be even hotter than that. So there are some cosmic shifts that, beyond global warming, beyond our environmental issues that are changing.
Right. Right. It's pretty intense. And I don't know what your thought is on the chemtrail phenomenon, but anybody can look up at the skies and see the difference between contrails and chemtrails. I mean, they definitely both exist. Do you think that that might have something to do with it, or they're trying to do some weird geoengineering, or they're using that to kind of block the sun?
I used to think that was completely absurd.
Right.
The chemtrail thing. I used to think like, oh, that people are crazy who think that. I really think it now because, I mean, there are really like a ton of documented things, especially in Los Angeles. They sit there at Griffith Park and they have they release this chemical into the air to try and create additional rain. And we are definitely being manipulated. There's a difference, and I completely believe in the chemtrail theories now, and I'm freaked out by them.
Yeah, and you seem to be in an area where you know some prestigious people. I mean, you've been in Hollywood and film production and stuff like that for how long now?
It's been a good 10 years.
Fantastic. And so why did you decide to get into this type of work in film production?
I've always loved movies, but it really came down to being able to create stories that I believe in. And I always wanted to create my own worlds and create my own concepts. So the only way I could do it was to do it myself.
That's great. So you basically wrote something down on paper. You came up with the story, and then you sent it out to some film companies. Is that how you got your?
Yeah. Let's see. I wrote Alien Abduction with one of my best friends. We sat down and put the whole project together. We'd go back and forth. I'd come up with kind of the original idea, then he'd write, give it back to me. I'd rewrite it. And we'd go back and forth on it. Then we had a script that we both felt was strong enough. And I gave it to a pretty well-known producer who I was friendly with, named Lawrence Bender. And Lawrence is pretty famous for doing all of Quentin Tarantino's films. So everything from Pulp Fiction to Reservoir Dogs, Kill Bill, Inglourious Bastards. Lawrence Bender produced it. So Lawrence read the script and really liked it. And once we had him on board, kind of all the pieces came together on it.
Yeah, that's great. And it looks like, I mean, you've also been a part of The Experiment. You were the executive producer. You're working on Ghost Detectives as well?
Yeah. That's another one that I wrote too. The Experiment was Adrian Brody and Forrest Whitaker. Actually, that's this other poster behind me is The Experiment.
Yeah. Now, what was that about?
So that was about the Stanford prison experiment. Also, a very real subject that we kind of turned into a fictional film. But the Stanford prison experiment takes place at Stanford University, and they take a group of 12 men. and make them prisoners, and take another group of 6 or 7 men and make them guards. And it's kind of the mentality of just these regular guys off the street. What propels them to start really inflicting pain and kind of damage on these inmates.
How intense does it get? I mean, is it?
It got really intense. The real Stanford Prison Experiment only lasted 2 days, I believe. I could be wrong about that, because there was physical violence that actually broke out.
And they just put an ad in the paper, and that's how they got these people?
They were college students, so it was all based on scientific experiments at the college campus.
Okay, wow, man, that's great. And if you could tell us a little bit also about American Satan, what's that about?
So I used to own a record label, and it was a bunch of like kind of heavier hard rock, metal, hardcore music, and so I come from that kind of world, and so I wrote American Satan. It was originally called Sympathy for the Devil, and that was based on my experiences of these bands kind of coming up and seeking fame and seeking fortune, moving from Ohio to Los Angeles. It's a classic Faustian tale of the rock and roll group being influenced by the devil, by being influenced by kind of a darkness. And these kids move out here, and they meet this kind of enigmatic stranger who ends up being the Dark One himself. And it's not a comedy; it's actually a thriller, kind of action, serious film. And the people who we have in it are phenomenal. Malcolm McDowell, Denise Richards, Mark Boone Jr. from Sons of Anarchy, John Bradley from Game of Thrones, Boo Boo Stewart from Twilight. And we have these new up-and-coming kind of stars who are already in some pretty big bands. Andy Black, who's the lead singer of Black Veil Brides, he's the star of the film. And then Ben Bruce from the band Asking Alexandria, he plays guitar in it. So if you know that scene and you know that kind of hard rock, kind of metal world, Asking Alexandria and Black Veil Brides are kind of the pinnacle of that. And having them both in a film is pretty special.
Well, and it seems like right now, that a great cast, by the way. I mean, that's fantastic. And it seems like right now there's a real big, I guess you could say, craze where a lot of people are turning to kind of the dark side to watch on TV, and even television itself seems to be becoming a little bit sinister, I guess you could say. Anything goes nowadays, and not to a certain extent, but like the new film Lucifer that's out, or the TV series Lucifer, and now American Satan. So I think that it's a really good time as far as ratings and what people are interested in to get this out there. Now, is it released right now, or when is it going to?
We just finished shooting about a month ago. It's in the editorial process right now. The director is Ash Avildsen. I wrote the script and produced the film. So Ash Avildsen's father is John G. Avildsen, and John G. is the director of Rocky and Karate Kid, and just a famous director. Lean on Me, The Power of One, incredible guy. So he was an executive producer on the film. So Ash is John's son, and he's currently editing it with Glenn Garland, who's probably more famous for all of Rob Zombie's films, from House of a Thousand Corpses to all the big Rob Zombie's movies, Halloween. So they're editing it right now, and it'll probably be about a year before that comes out.
Oh, that's great. And another question I'd like to ask, because I feel it definitely correlates with this film and what it is about, kind of the underlying theme. This guy comes from nowhere, this mysterious man, and then they write a contract out. People have talked for years about selling your soul to the devil, and especially in Hollywood, it seems like a lot of people come out and openly admit that they've sold their soul, and you can look at one side and say, well, they're doing it for ratings and it's a joke, ha ha ha. And then there's going to be the other side of the coin where people are like, no, man, that's really, they did it. I mean, they pricked their finger and they signed their name in blood and they've got a contract. And there's some very mysterious circumstances to some entertainers that have died at the age of 27. You've got the 27 Club. I'm sure that would make a great film for you.
Yeah. Well, part of that is the, if you look at the influencers of bands like Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath with Mr. Crowley.
Oh yeah,
Aleister Crowley. You get into the real metaphysics of it, and the from the Anton LaVey's of it all. There really is this kind of metaphysical dark influence in rock music, Everyone from Bob Dylan to Kanye West talk about how they've sold their souls.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we could go on for probably an entire show about naming just people on a list. I mean, there's so many of them that have said that they have done that. And another thing that I think is interesting as well is if you look at the media today and how powerful it is, it certainly seems to have such a huge impact, not only on economics and technologies, the way the future is sculpted, but let's look at things that have happened in certain films like Knowing, as an example, with Nicolas Cage. You've seen that film, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember where he's sitting down watching TV in the recliner and he's looking at these numbers that are correlating to dates and events that are going to happen? And then he looks at the TV. He's watching TV, and on CNN at 4/20, which is the date that the Gulf oil disaster actually happened, well, he's looking at the same date, and that event takes place like a year later after the film was released. And there's oftentimes these mysterious things happen in films that then happen later almost to a T. And I wanted to get your take on that.
I mean, if you look at art imitating life, imitating art,
right?
It's constant. History is cyclical. Things constantly come back around. So I think when I write, there's a level of a channel I go through. I don't know if you can really say that completely, but it's almost like I'm here in this vessel, but something's writing through me, and I often feel almost as if I'm a medium writing, and sometimes I write some completely insane things, and that's actually sometimes that's my best work.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you get yourself in certain mental states oftentimes when you do start writing? Do you meditate? Do you have certain rituals? And when I say rituals, I just mean like turn on the music to a certain song, and then you've got the lights at a certain level, etc.
Oh yeah, I mean what's cool is my grandmother had the ability to automatic write. And I would sit there and watch her, and she would grab a pen like this and have a pad, and she'd hold the pen, barely holding it, and it would write like crazy.
Right.
And messages for people. She would channel people's loved ones. People would come to her house, and she would do this for them. I like to think maybe I have a little bit of that in me, and maybe it was passed down.
Yeah, that's great.
Maybe in my script writing, I channel some of that, and I have some of that within me. So yeah, I mean, I like to think that.
That's really
it does
cool.
come through me. I hear it.
No, another thing too, there was a comment that a friend of mine, Jason, made the other day on an episode that we did here at the Leak Project, where he said, you can write something on paper or you can write it in clay. You can make a book or you can make a film, turn it into a storyline. And like what you're doing, you're making stories, you're making films. And that seems to have a much larger impact on society. And when you've got so many people that can dial in and watch something at the same time with what you're doing, man, especially if you're channeling these incredible energies, who knows where they're coming from, you really could have a substantial impact. I mean, do you ever think about that? Like, wow, there's been 5 million or 10 million or X amount of people that have seen my films that I wrote. I mean, that's got to have a pretty cool impact.
It does. I mean, I always have this driving force within me. It comes from my grandfather. My grandfather was a huge builder and developer, and I remember driving down the street with him in Miami, and he's pointing out all the buildings that he had built. And he said, these will be here long after I'm gone, and this is kind of my legacy that I'm leaving. And I felt that same connection to film, which is this is something that I'm creating that will be here forever. It's something that's everlasting. And these stories that you create and the stories that you're telling could have a consistent impact that you're leaving your legacy behind. It's really interesting.
Now, where are you thinking about as far as your next production? Are you going to go into something sci-fi as well?
I have a few things science fiction written, but the next thing I'm actually working on, it's right in the other room, I've got my writing partner. We're actually writing a script right now. It's based on the Count of Monte Cristo. But it's in modern day New York, and it's like a mob style action film. So it's a little different. I mean, I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up outside of Manhattan. And my father's from Brooklyn. My grandfather's from Brooklyn, and it's called This Is Brooklyn, This Is Queens. So it's not a science fiction movie at all.
Yeah. Now, also, I'm thinking there's so many different channels now that you can get really cool series on. I like some of the stuff that's out there now, and with Roku, and you can plug in these streaming services, it's easier to set up a channel. Have you thought about setting up like your own streaming channel as well?
I don't think I have. It takes so much energy for me to create something big. It takes a long time for me. So I don't know if I'd have enough content to really throw out there yet. But I do have one big science fiction project that I am working on. It's just way more ambitious than I'm able to pull off at this moment. But I will get to it. Hold on, I'll show you. I think I have the book right next to me here. One second.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Can't wait to
So
see this.
I optioned the rights to this book, which is Jupiter, by very famous science fiction author Ben Bova.
Okay.
Ben has written, about 120 plus novels, and they're all, pretty thick. He's won a Hugo Award, and it's all about space exploration and the finding of life forms on other planets. And this book is one of my all-time favorites. I just love it. And so I'm so thrilled. We're on the first draft of the script already, and it's just turning out incredible. It's about a human exploration of the planet Jupiter and finding these massive life forms that are the size of entire cities.
That reminds me of Cloverfield.
Yeah, it's sort of in that giant Leviathan, that's what they're called, these massive creatures.
Do they look like humans, or?
No, they don't at all. They're completely outside of the realm of what we could believe. Basically, the concept is that Jupiter, the gravitational pull of Jupiter is on the outside, it's gas. But as you go deeper into the surface of the planet, the pressures that exist turn that gas into liquid. And it's the largest ocean you can possibly imagine. I mean, hundreds of Earths can fit inside Jupiter. So you've got this vast, vast ocean. And so these creatures form in this giant ocean, and they're the diversity of life. And not only that, but they're highly intelligent. They communicate through light, and like you and I communicate through language, they actually have these giant light panels on their bodies, and they're beaming things back and forth at each other at just such a high velocity and a high rate that we as humans have to slow it down. We'll take a video of it and put it in slow motion, and you can see they're communicating through these light patterns. And you guys should see almost a video image on the sides of these creatures.
Yeah, that's some next level sci-fi stuff, man. I like that. That's good. I can't wait to see where that's going to go. Are you going to make that into like a series then, I hope?
Initially we're going to start off with a feature film.
Okay.
It's a much bigger budget than I've worked with before.
Oh, great.
It'll be 100 million plus, one of those big kind of blockbusters. I'm working on putting all the pieces together right now, but it's pretty ambitious.
Oh, that's great. I certainly can't wait to see it. Any good sci-fi stuff like that just takes it to the next level, where you're going with that from that old school book that you're pulling up that many people haven't even heard of. I mean, just those gems in there, and you're taking it to the next level. I can certainly appreciate that. And I wonder, too, you look at so many anomalies in our own solar system. You look at our own moon. You look at the rings of Saturn, and they've got these weird moons. One's called Iapetus, one's called Mimas, and they look like the Death Star from Star Wars, literally. And, you got George Lucas writing about the old school wars that went around millions and millions of years ago, and I wonder, could there be some channeling there as well? I mean, what do you think about the whole Star Wars ideology, just as far as the archetype, obviously? Do you think that space war history and some of the stuff that's on these planets could possibly be from our ancestors or ancient civilizations?
I think absolutely. Our existence on this planet is a mere blip in the history of the evolution of this planet. And then think of the stars beyond that, the amount of time and billions of years. We're so small in comparison to that. There could have been, civilizations upon civilizations that have been on every planet in the solar system, that are constantly there. I mean, we haven't been able to explore our own oceans.
Right.
We've only seen a small percentage of it, so we barely know what's down there.
Right.
Our arrogance as humans to think that we're the center of the universe is just like saying the Earth is flat.
What do you think about that whole new psyop now with the Earth is flat theory? And you've got millions and millions of views on some of these YouTube videos where people are like, "Man, it's in the Bible. It's true. I know it." And then it's incredible, man. I'm wondering if this is like a psyop, almost like a Tavistock psyop or something.
It could be. It's funny. Jupiter, the premise of it and the way it begins is that there is a new morality, which is the government now. And it's sort of 1984 of it all, where the opposite of that, actually, where religious zealots have kind of taken over the government. It's Christian. And they really go by the word of the Bible completely. And because they're finding these intelligent life forms on Jupiter, the governments are completely against the research that they're doing. That there couldn't be life outside of Earth or human beings. That God created man in his own image, and that's how it is.
So they just want them to find space rocks. They didn't want them to find actual creatures.
Yeah, I mean, they're only at Jupiter because they're harvesting these minerals that we really need back on Earth. There's gases and minerals and things that, you can harvest in large amounts there. So they're not really supposed to be doing as much scientific research. And they're breaking the law by doing so.
Wow. All great things start from somewhere. Rebelling.
Yes.
Wow. That's really cool. Now, also, since you're a big sci-fi buff, are you familiar with Zecharia Sitchin?
Oh, no, I'm not.
Oh, wow. Okay. So he could take your mind to the next level, just some of the stuff that he's written about the Anunnaki and the Sumerian tablets.
About some of that, yeah.
Now, whether or not it's real or it's, translated improperly, I don't know. I mean, I certainly think there's some stuff there that can make sense and connect dots, but I'm still agnostic on just about everything because I've heard everything, so I take everything with a grain of salt. But regardless, the Planet X theory right now is taking a huge craze as well. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if it's real or not, but I certainly see some incredible Earth changes, and I've seen some good footage. And I also know that that's one subject that gets trolled more than just about any other. And I interview people on all fields, talk to people about MK Ultra stuff, talk to politicians, talk to alternative health, whatever. And it seems like that specific subject gets more flack than any of them. So that's what's made me think and consider the possibilities more than even the pictures. But what's your take on that, if I can ask?
Well, this is a little bit more complicated kind of process for me of talking about these things. But so I was hypnotized and did a past life regression about 3.5 years ago. Now this is getting into a little bit off topic from exactly what you're talking about, but it comes back, I promise.
Sure, absolutely.
So I went and was regressed, and I went lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, and I could see back and full on images and feeling, and I could experience those lifetimes. And eventually I went back to this other level, which was kind of a higher self and a higher understanding. And this was a kind of an all-knowing me, my soul, so to speak. And I really got into the thought process after this of, if there are alien life forms, and if we are all part of one kind of godly force, we're all part of this one kind of central sun, light, mm-hmm. Then if there is reincarnation, and if those things really do exist, and it's not just some concept in my own head, then why couldn't we have been reincarnated or been born on other planets, and vice versa? So, this Planet X theory and the alteration of our solar system, I don't think it's like the end of humanity, or it could be a huge shift and it could be a huge change. But if we're these universal creatures that I believe we are, I don't have any specific proof of it, then you do you are more than this body, you are more than this machine, you are more than this this vehicle that we're in right now. And we've been infinite and kind of been born on multiple planets. So I'm not worried. I don't worry about those things so much. If it happens, it's kind of cool and it's an observation.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also feel, even if it does exist and it's going to get close to the Earth, I do not think that it's going to be an extinction level event. And I feel that we're going to continue to thrive. I mean, there's more of us now here than there ever has been before, at least in the modern history that we know of. And we have the technologies, I feel, to kind of change things as well to make this Earth a little bit more balanced, I feel, as far as just kind of the depletion of resources and stuff. But it'll all work itself out, I think. It usually does. And it's really nice to talk with you, Matty. I'm glad that you came on here with us, the Leak Project. And it's great to get a different perspective. And also just really looking forward to seeing these films you got coming out, and especially that last one you talked about. If you want to send me a banner or something, I'd love to put it on the website for you, and just whenever. So thank you so much.
Sure, absolutely. It was great talking to you too.
Right on. Folks, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/clandestine time lord. Also, leakproject.com, and you can check out Matty's website. Now, Matty, you are at mattybeckerman.com, and you've got one other website you said also, and YouTube.
Alienabductionfilm.com.
alienabductionfilm.com. Wonderful. All right, folks, stay safe and be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have Matty Beckerman with us, currently residing in California and a member of the Directors Guild of America. Now, we're going to be discussing the Brown Mountain Lights out there in North Carolina and just some amazing anomalies associated with them. Now, he is also the writer of several films and working on two currently, American Satan and Miss Cannabis. So he has a lot of stuff on his plate right now, and we're going to do our best to pick his brain with the limited amount of time that we have. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
I'm great, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's an honor to speak with you, and this is just really exciting. I talked to you a little bit before the show and told you about the Marfa Lights that I want to go visit just a few hours away from me in San Antonio, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And you said that there's actually some similarities to the Brown Lights that you did a lot of research on and that had a big impact on your film.
Yeah, I mean, the Marfa Lights, very similarly to the Brown Mountain Lights, have, a history of people you can actually go and see them. It's something that, thousands of people have seen over hundreds of years. And it's a physical anomaly and it hasn't been explained. Same thing with the Brown Mountain Lights. Just like the Marfa Lights in Texas, there's physical road signs. You could pull right up there, and if you're lucky, you'll see them. Not everybody does, but oftentimes you will.
When did you first discover the Brown Mountain Lights?
So my family had been living in the mountains of North Carolina since the 70s. My grandparents have a home there. I would go visit them all the time, and I would always hear stories about the Brown Mountain Lights. And I'd never seen them. I'd never gone to them. So one summer I was working up at my uncle's store, which was kind of like a flea market type mall. And one of the guys that I worked with there, nicest guy ever, a little kooky, he started telling me this story about how he had seen the Brown Mountain Lights and he was abducted. I really did not believe him. I was very skeptical. I was like, this guy's nuts, But he was really convinced. And then he had this story about being repeatedly abducted. I took it with a grain of salt. I said, oh, that's interesting, but what's this?
Right.
Then I started hearing from a lot more people who had seen the lights and also claimed they'd been abducted. And I heard this from a police officer, from a school teacher. And once it got to that level for me, I was completely captivated by it. I said, this is too strange. I have to go research it.
Absolutely. Now, the school teacher and the police officer that had that testimony, did they describe similar things happening to them with these abductions, or did you hear much about that?
Yeah, I did. So when I went out and started writing the movie, it was originally called Project Blue Book. And because the Brown Mountain Lights is actually a subject of one of the Project Blue Book original investigations, and it's one of the ones that were inconclusive. So that's how I started writing the film, and really based on the Brown Mountain Lights, but not completely. And then as I got to North Carolina and started really doing the heavy research for the film, I started interviewing people on camera and kind of getting their opinion and their backstories. And the opening of the film, Alien Abduction, which is the poster kind of sitting right behind me here.
That's a cool poster.
Thank you. It's the opening of the movie is basically a documentary showing the interviews with people and kind of the experts. And we go to Appalachian State University and we interview the professor of astronomy there who's been studying the lights for many, many years. We talked to Josh Warren, a leading paranormal expert, and we talked to a bunch of locals who claim they've seen the lights and things that have happened to them around it. So we go back into the history of it and really kind of show it. And that was really what was fascinating to me, was creating this story based on real events.
Now, how far back have they dated these lights?
They date back over 800 years. So they predate electricity. The first reports were from the Cherokee and Catawba Indians, Native Americans. And the story is, and the legend is, that there was a giant battle, and the Braves were up there fighting, and they all died. And the lights are supposedly the lanterns and torches of the women who go out looking for their husbands. And that's what the lights are supposed to symbolize. Now, this story is kind of repeated throughout history. There's this folk song actually called the Brown Mountain Lights, which is one of the most famous bluegrass songs. And if you look it up, everyone from Roy Orbison's covered it. You know, all the big famous bluegrass and folk kind of artists have covered this song. And it's about a plantation owner who is hunting on Brown Mountain, and he goes missing. And all of his slaves go out searching for him, and they can't find him either. And then they go missing as well. So this story of large groups of people going missing keeps on repeating itself throughout history. And it's always associated with the lights. And the Brown Mountain Lights song is really based on, they say that the lights are the lanterns of the slaves looking for the slave owner, looking for the plantation owner.
Now, I'm looking at some of the pictures on your website, mattybeckerman.com, and it looks like there's these anomalies almost above the hand there. And I mean, this is really cool. So you took these back just a few years ago then?
Yeah, so I actually saw the lights myself. So my wife and I went to the Overlook, and just like in Marfa, Texas, there are signs right on the sides of the highway that say, "This is the Brown Mountain Lights Overlook. This is where you go and see them." So we went to the kind of backwoods stop, which is called Wiseman's View. And I brought a friend of mine who is a shaman who trained in Peru, and